My name is Alexander Ochs. I'm the Director of Climate and Energy at the Worldwatch Institute, for those of you who don't know me. The Worldwatch Institute is one of the oldest sustainability think tanks in the United States, with a network of researchers and partners around the world. We consider it our job to analyze the state of the world, which is the name of one of our flagship publications, and the latest one has just come out. It's translated in some 20 languages, published in some 50 countries worldwide, and has the title, Is Sustainability Still Possible? And we're going to hear a little bit about this today as well. So I think it's the first time in 40 years that Worldwatch put a question on its title, and it's discussed in here. It's a great book, and we have some copies outside if you want to grab one. So we take the pulse of the planet. We check the planet for its vital signs, which is the title, of course, of a second flagship publication, and we follow these sustainability trends, some 25 trends also online, and update them regularly. So I also encourage you to look that up and make up your own mind where we stand in terms of the development of sustainability and how well we treat the planet we all live on. So our mission is to design and promote policies that help build a world that is economically and socially and environmentally sustainable, and it meets human needs and human aspirations. So I'm really happy to be the moderator of this event here today, which will present two new reports by REN 21. What's REN 21? REN 21 is the Renewable Energy Policy Network of the 21st century. It is a global renewable energy policy multi-stakeholder network that connects people from all across the world: governments, international organizations, industry associations, science and academia, as well as civil society. And REN 21's mission is to facilitate knowledge exchange, policy development, and joint action toward a rapid global transition to renewable energy. REN 21 promotes renewable energy to meet the needs of both industrialized and developed countries, needs that are driven by climate change, energy security, and economic development, and poverty alleviation. So some of the most pressing issues. So I'm very honored to be joined by three panelists as of now. We're still hoping for the fourth one. So let me turn to the agenda. We wanted to start with Representative Rush Holt, who I want to thank at this point for hosting this event. And he had not only a bill today that he has to defend on the floor, but also an appointment coming in at 10:30, and he's promised us to come right after this. We had him with us 2 years ago when he was hosting the same event together with Marky. So he's a great friend, and he's a great supporter of Worldwatch and REN 21, so we're still hoping to have him. So I don't want to introduce him when he is coming. Second in our lineup is Mohamed El-Ashry, and I'm going to introduce very quickly the other two and tell you a little bit more about them before they speak. We have Christina Linz of REN 21 and Eric Martinot, who is the author of the second report. I'm going to tell you a little bit more about them. Let me introduce Mohamed El-Ashry. Mohamed is a senior fellow with the UN Foundation and a facilitator of the Global Leadership for Climate Action, an initiative which he launched in 2007. Its membership include no less than 13 former presidents and prime ministers and 12 other global leaders. He served as the chief executive officer and as chairman of the Global Environmental Facility, which he helped to establish. Prior to creating the GEF, he served as chief environmental advisor to the president and director of the Environment Department at the World Bank. He served as a senior vice president of the World Resource Institute, a great partner organization of ours, and as Director of Environmental Quality with the Tennessee Valley Authority. I could go on and on and on. I'm just going to say a few more things. Mohammed has held teaching positions in Cairo for the Pan American Oil Company, so he has quite a history also in that field. At Wilkes University and at the Environmental Defense Fund, he was working with UNDP, was the special advisor for the 1992 UN Summit in Rio, and a number of other things. He has degrees from the University of Cairo, and including a PhD degree from University of Illinois. He has published 3 books, 250 papers, and received a number of international honors, including the Champions of the Earth Award. Mohamed is here also as a chairman of the Renewable Energy Policy Network for the 21st Century, REN 21, that has made this event possible and these books possible, these reports possible. So, Mohamed, the floor is yours. Thanks for your opening remarks.
Thank you, Alexander. Your introduction of me is actually longer than the remarks I'm going to make, because the key players are Christine and Eric here, presenting insights from the two reports that you may have heard of. The GSR, the Global Status, the Renewables Global Status Report, and the GFR, the Renewables Global Futures Report. So, and by the way, I am no longer chairman of REN 21. As of January, we announced REN 21 as a legal entity, registered in Germany as a German association, but still a multi-stakeholder, bringing together key players from the different sectors, whether it's government, industry associations, academics, civil society, and I guess that's it. So now it's time for someone else to run it. I was the chair for 7 years, and it was a pleasure working, of course, with Christine Lins at the time. It was also a pleasure working with Eric Martinot. When you look at his bio, in case he does not get an extensive introduction like mine, you'll find that he worked for the GF for 4 years when I was the CEO there. And of course, you know, all the great things he's doing, no surprise, he did great things at the GF as well. So let me really, on behalf of REN 21 in particular, add my welcome to you to this briefing here. And even though Representative Holt is not here, I also would like to thank him on behalf of the organizations for hosting this briefing. In case you don't know, he combines politics and science. He's a PhD in physics, which of course I'm happy to know someone also who's in the policy arena, who is a PhD scientist. My PhD is in geology, but I work with policies related to environment and renewable energy. And he has conducted extensive research in the areas of alternative energy, and actually has a patent for a solar device. I was going to ask him what is that solar device does when he shows up, but maybe we will not know this time, and we'll try to find out some other time. Now, let me just really say a few words here to get things started and set the stage for what Christine and Eric will do. When REN 21 was founded in 2004, the future of renewable energy looked very different from what it is today. No one imagined then that 70% of new power capacity added in Europe would be renewable, which is what happened in 2011. No one imagined that in the US, in the last 6 years alone, electricity from renewables would quadruple, and the solar industry would employ 35% more people than coal mining. You heard it right. Solar industry in the US employs 35% more people than coal mining, and that's according to the Bureau of Labor Statistics, an official government institution. And that was in 2012, last year. That's the latest statistics that are there. And no one imagined that China would go from minor player to a global leader in just 6 years, or that developing countries, as a group, would become home to more than 1/3 of global wind power capacity. The evolution of policies and markets for renewable energy has been truly remarkable over the past decade. But we also know that in the US and in Europe, renewable energy is currently facing new challenges, particularly in the areas of new investment and new policies. Global energy investment dipped, the latest numbers, 11% last year from preceding year, as leading European countries scaled back their incentives program. In the US, recent domestic boom in natural gas, and the lack of strong support mechanisms, including the uncertainty whether the production tax credit would actually be let to expire at the end of this year. It has been renewed 1 year at a time, and that's not the way to expect really major investments. Certainty is very important, regardless of the kind of regulation or the kind of policy, but as long as it is for a long period of time, so it can allow investors to plan accordingly. So this lack of certainty is affecting investment in the renewable sector in the US. But on the bright side, Asia had a 16% growth in investment in 2012 over 2011. I'm very pleased, and I want to thank actually Alexander and the Worldwatch for convening this briefing, which is very fitting to be during Earth Day week. So Earth Day was 3 days ago, but we still are in that week, and to have this briefing here is really very fitting and appropriate. So as the invitation indicated, the briefing features insights from leading renewable energy experts, these two, and from the two newly released reports of REN 21, the Renewables Global Status Report, which has become the most referenced report or book around the world on renewable energy markets, technologies, and policies. And of course, the second one is the Renewables Global Futures Report, which is an innovative new report grounded in opinions of 170 leading experts, as well as the projections of 50 recently published scenarios. I'm not going to say any more and take the wind out of Christine and Eric. I just wanted to highlight and just give a push to what they are going to say, and look forward to hearing their remarks. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mohammed. We need to be a little bit spontaneous. If the representative comes, or when he comes, I'm thinking it's not a matter of if as of now, it's a matter of when. We need to be spontaneous and give him the word. But we want to turn to Christina now. Christina was appointed Executive Secretary of REN 21 in July 2011, so she's well into her second year. Before that, she served as Secretary General of the European Renewable Energy Council, which is nothing less than the united voice of Europe's renewable energy industry. She has more than 15 years of working experience in the field of renewable energy resources. She has a master's degree in international economics and applied languages, and she will present brand new insights from this year's Global Status Report. Now, you're going to ask, where's this report? The one that I'm holding up right now is last year's. These are the key insights. We have the whole report outside as well. Mohammed introduced the Global Status Report already a little bit. It has grown to become a truly collaborative effort of more than 400 authors, and it is the most frequently referenced report on the renewable energy market and industry and policy trends, but it's not here yet. So the reason why that is it's going to be published in June. And you know, the every year's report can be found also on the REN 21 website, but I think that makes it even more special to have her here, because she's gonna provide some insights already now, I think for the first time to an audience like this, from this year's report, which is currently being edited, and so I hope you feel very special about being the first ones to get some insights from the latest trends. Christina.
Thank you very much, Alexander. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Indeed, you are the lucky ones, because we are doing a sneak preview 6 weeks before we launch the report. It's going to come out on the 11th of June, and we normally do these previews a week before, 2 weeks before, but normally not in that interval. But the US is often ahead of time, so there we go. And what I'll be doing in the next couple of minutes is to give you an overview on what the status of renewable energy is right now globally. And this, I think, will be a perfect basis for Eric Martinot's overview about the future of renewable energy.
Sorry, didn't mean to disrupt.
No,
Well, we're very happy to have you, and I told everyone already that we're going to be somewhat spontaneous. Do you want to continue, or
Sure,
shall
whatever.
we?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, so I'll give you in a nutshell the overview about the status, and that this is then going to be followed by the overview of current thinking about the future given by Eric Martinot. REN 21 has already been introduced, which is very good because like this I don't need to go through all these acronyms on my slide. We are a multi-stakeholder policy network. Basically, I would refer to REN 21 as the coalition of the willing, all those in both the public and the private sector that want to promote renewables, that are grouped together since 2004. We have an international secretariat that is based at the United Nations Environment Programme in Paris, in France, and together with all our members, and in close cooperation with partners such as Worldwatch, for example, we are trying to promote renewables globally. It has been referred to, our flagship publication, the Global Status Report, is an annual publication that we are publishing now since 2005. Initially, Eric Martinot was the lead author of the Global Status Report, so it's really great to have him here as well. And this is really, I would say, the most authoritative overview. It's no analysis, it's really presenting the status of global market, industry, policy, and investment development as we launched together with UNEP's Global Trends in Renewable Energy Investment. Initially, back in 2005, the renewable sector was very different, as Mohammed has pointed out. Nowadays, we rely on a network of over 500 people from all around the world who contribute information and review things as the reality is evolving rapidly. We cover all renewable technologies, we cover all sectors from electricity, heating and cooling, and transport. And every year we are trying to introduce new features. Last year we had an emphasis on the complementarity of energy efficiency and renewable energy policy. This year our feature is on system integration. It's going to be on system integration because we see, as renewables are becoming mainstream, the challenge of integrating them into electricity systems and energy systems is a big one, and this is actually an aspect that needs to be focused on. It comes out 12th of June, free of charge, downloadable from our website, and here we go. So where do we stand in a nutshell as far as renewables is concerned worldwide? Renewables supply an estimated 18% of global final energy consumption. We see that still about half of this is traditional biomass, and we have a global commitment to double the share of renewable energy in the global energy mix by 2030, with of course an emphasis on sustainable renewables, which means that the modern renewables in the form of wind, modern biomass, solar, and hydro, they need to more than double. They, I guess, need to triple or even quadruple over the next decade or the next 2 decades. So there is quite some challenge ahead of us. But all the players in the industry think that this is absolutely feasible. And but again, I think I'll leave the future perspective to Eric there. What we see right now, the status of renewable energy worldwide, we see a continuous growth, despite the fact that investment in 2012 has dropped a bit. We see that there are some countries where we face some policy uncertainties, but we also see what I would call the geography of renewables expanding, meaning it's not anymore technologies that are deployed only in OECD countries, but we have more and more also developing countries where the increase of energy demand is actually the highest where we see that renewables are rapidly expanding and where policies are put in place to promote those. So as far as power is concerned, we have about 25% of global power generation capacity being based on renewables, and about 20% of global electricity that was produced from renewable energy. In 2011, I don't have the global figure yet for 2012, renewables accounted for nearly half of the new electricity capacity that was installed. So basically all the power plants in the world that were built, half of them were renewables based, and the figure for Europe, so this half is not equally spread all around the globe. Here, this slide shows effectively the new annual power capacity added in the European Union in 2012, and that again was more than the global average half, was 70%. So more than 2/3 of all the new power plants were based on renewables, and a bit of a funny color code in this graph. The green bar is actually the added PV capacity. So I don't know why the author shows green for PV. It's a bit misleading, I would say, but I think it's quite remarkable to see that photovoltaics, they are accounted again for quite a high increase. And this is also something that we actually see on a global level. Again, here the graph goes until 2011, because our artwork is not yet ready for 2012, but we already have the figures. So again, in 2012, 30 gigawatt of new solar PV capacity came into being, were installed, which brings the global cumulative installed solar PV capacity to 101 gigawatts. So this is, I think, quite impressive. And what I would like you to look at this and to notice, it took us about 15 years from 1995 to 2010 to get to 40 gigawatts. It took us, we nearly doubled in 1 year, and then it took us now, and so the increase, what I want to say is the increase is really very, very steep. And what we see is, with this development, we see that the prices of solar modules, they fell 40% in 2011. Everybody thought that that's going to be it, but we see that they fell by another 20% in 2012. So we actually see that as the market evolves, I guess that means there's some vote going on or whatever there. As the market evolves, prices drop down, which of course make the technology.
No, it's not.
Okay, no fire alarm. Which makes the technology accessible to more and more players also in the developing part of the world. As far as wind, we saw again 40 gigawatt of wind power capacity being installed in 2012. 2012, however, was, I think, an interesting year. It was a record year for US installations. We saw for the first time a slower market in China. I'll come back to the US situation in a moment. And we clearly see that because it was a record year for US installations, because it was still all the installations from the backlog of investment in 2011, when I guess there were lots of recovery packages that were running out. And so what we see is we unfortunately do not expect that this great US development is continuing in the coming years. I'm coming to this in a second. But all in all, also in wind, positive development, Asia being the global lead, and then North America, and then followed by Europe. I'm not going to go through, because of time, through all the technologies. You have these different developments effectively in the global status report. There's just one thing that I would like to point out here as well, and that is a graph showing the development in concentrating solar thermal power, so CSP installations. And I think there we see in the last couple of months we see a rapid development in the Middle East. In 2013, in March, we saw the opening of the largest CSP power plant in the United Arab Emirates. And we also see that Morocco is quite active in that development. They've started the construction of a 160 megawatt installation in Ouarzazate. And I think this is just showing, and this can also be seen in investment figures, that effectively the Middle East and North Africa region is picking up, and there we see that renewables are developing rapidly, and I guess we are going to see more and more growth also in the years to come there. And we also see that effectively policies in these countries there were lots of announcements, the announcement of Saudi Arabia to invest $100 billion in renewables, and quite interesting developments, which effectively now policy measures need to follow. I just want to spend a second on also emphasizing the importance of heating and cooling, because this is, I think, something that we often forget in the debate, because we exclusively focus very often on electricity, and still a lion's share of final energy consumption is used for producing heating and cooling. And also there we see that both solar thermal, biomass and geothermal energy can effectively provide quite some interesting solutions, and this is definitely something where China, as being the big champion in solar thermal, but also other countries are quite advanced and developing their technologies. The renewables industry globally employs nowadays about 5 million people, mainly concentrated in bioenergy and solar industries. And we have seen also last year quite significant cost reductions. I mentioned the ones in PV as well in onshore wind. However, we also saw some changing policy landscapes which led to industry uncertainties, to declining policy support, and we also saw trade disputes. So there is a lot of going on, and to a certain extent also there was some industry consolidation that was happening in the last years. In terms of investment, Mohammed has pointed out, you see on the left the graph showing the renewable energy investment, and on the right until 2011, and on the right the graph on clean energy investment. These are figures from Bloomberg New Energy Finance that were just revealed this week in New York at the Bloomberg New Energy Finance Clean Energy Summit. So when they say clean energy investment, that contains investments in renewables, energy efficiency, and smart technologies. So it's not exclusively renewables. And there we saw a decline of 11%. And you saw that in the previous years, we were, I would say, very much used to a lot of success. The curve was very steady, which on the one hand is due to reductions of investment in some regions in the world, for the first time in Europe, but also in North America. And which is of course also due to the fact that technology costs have come down, and equipment is effectively cheaper. So there, I don't know whether you managed to read, this is the top 15 countries for new investment in clean energy in 2012, just the really newly released figures. China up by 20%, then Japan up by 75%, so I think there we see the development or the changes in the energy sector post-Fukushima, an increase of 40% in Australia and of 20,000% in South Africa. So that is effectively, due to the fact that new policies are put in place, and of course, I mean, the 20,000% means that they started from fairly low, but still now they had about $5.5 billion that were invested in the market. And for the first time in 2012, the investment in Asia was larger than in any other of the regions, which I think is also quite interesting. And we saw that Asia and the Middle East and Africa increased, whereas the other regions, they went down. So when you look at the US annual clean energy investment and the capacity additions, and this I think nicely shows a quite challenging situation, you have on the one hand, on the investment side, you have a drop from 2011 to 2012 of minus 32%, and this is referring to the changing policy framework and the uncertainty in the market. And on the other hand, you have an addition of capacity between 2011 and 2012 of 100%. And that is kind of the backlog of all the installations that were financed through the recovery packages that came into existence. But you can imagine that for an industry, this is quite difficult because effectively it shows an up and down and not a continuation, and that makes it, I would say, quite challenging for the industry sometimes. A final word on policy. In the Global Status Report, we are also tracking the situation of policies in different countries. The report contains a very comprehensive policy table giving an overview on applied instruments on a country basis. We have now around 120 countries in the world, more than half of them being developing countries, that have renewable energy targets, policy targets in place, and I think that is a great testimony of the spreading geography of renewables and effectively also of the fact that these technologies are becoming affordable, and the countries in the world that have the biggest increase in energy demand are the ones that orienting themselves towards renewables. And we also clearly see that in many countries, I guess also here, the state level and the regional level is important. That's where lots of development is happening, and also lots of cities around the world that put the focus and an emphasis on renewables promotion. And finally, I think this is something which I find very, very important is always to remember is that yes, we do track in the Global Status Report mainly the supply side, but we must by no means forget that renewables policies always have to be combined with demand side policies. And I think the initiative of the UN Secretary General Ban Ki-moon on sustainable energy for all, with the three complementary goals of doubling the share of renewables, increasing the global rate of improvement of energy efficiency, they are important, they go together. And then finally also, of course, doubling the share of, or ensuring energy access for all is something that is important when that's one of the drivers, right, why we also promote renewable energy. And this is kind of, I would say, the framework for our current development and also for our future outlook, which will be now presented by Eric. Thank you very much.
I think we're going to do you next. It's great to have Eric in a moment to tell us about the future and some of the scenarios that might be ahead of us. But before we do so, I think we're going to have a speaker who is really the perfect candidate to make the link between the present and the future, because he will have to decide on what this future really looks like, at least here in this country. It's really a great honor to have Representative Rush Holt here with us for the second time already. Thank you so much for hosting this. I'm tempted to say Congressman Holt doesn't need an introduction, but it is so impressive that I'm going to say just a few things about his biography. He's a Democratic congressman from New Jersey's 12th district. Rush has been a member of the U.S. House of Representatives since 1999. He serves on the Committee on Natural Resources, where he's actually the ranking member on the Subcommittee on Energy and Mineral Resources, so we have really the right person here. He's a real champion of renewable energy and energy efficiency and anything sustainable energy in the House. He's working hard every day to find a long-term strategy for how to decrease the United States' dependence on fossil fuels and how to protect our environment for future generations. Usually I would say, like, that's enough of an introduction, but there's one more thing I do want to mention, because he is much more than this. He has actually a BA in physics and a master's and a PhD from NYU, and held positions as a Congressional Science Fellow and as a nuclear arms or disarmament expert. But also he was assistant director of the Princeton Plasma Physics Laboratory at Princeton University, which is actually the largest Center for Research in Alternative Energy. Mohammed already mentioned in his welcome, he conducted extensive research on alternative energy, and he has his own patent for a solar energy device. So this is very impressive, I find, for a congressman. He really knows what he's talking about. And I do need to mention he's also a 5-time winner of the game show Jeopardy. In February, it's true, in February 2011, Mr. Holt beat Mr. Watson, which is IBM's computer system, in a simulated round of Jeopardy at an event to promote innovation. So I wish I was really half as smart as you are, Congressman, and the floor is yours. Thank you very much for coming.
Thank you. Thanks, Alexander, and I wish I were half as smart as you make me sound. That's, I'm pleased to see the room crowded. We got a room as large as you said you needed, but I wish we had gotten a larger room. But it is good to see so many people here for such a good program, and I won't take time and interrupt the good program. I just wanted to make a few comments about where we find ourselves today. Yes, as you just heard, depending on how you define renewables, we're up around 100 gigawatts of capacity. And in other words, that's sort of 100 city-sized power plants is one way to conceive of that. That's good. And the industry is moving ahead nicely, both in production and installation of renewable and efficiency technologies. But it's moving along, at least in this country, without any of the urgency that there should be. It's moving along at a fairly relaxed pace because the technologies are available. There's plenty of room for improvement, and which is why we should be investing in research, not just in the gadgets, not just in the solid state physics, but also researching networking, social matters, and other things that are connected with this. But that aside, we are losing track in this country. We have lost track here in Congress that about now we are barreling past 400 parts per million of CO2 in the atmosphere. And maybe barreling past is the right terminology for that. And that is not driving our energy policy. And it should. Now, there are all sorts of good reasons to be developing alternative energy production and use. And I do want to emphasize production and use. There are all sorts of reasons to do it. But I have to ask my colleagues, how many Hurricane Sandys, how many barges running aground in the Mississippi, how many wildfires out west, how many disruptions, costly in lives and dollars, in our climate do we need before we actually assign some urgency to the energy transition? And we're not there yet. In fact, the level of urgency seems to have declined even as the greenhouse gas concentration, the greenhouse gas concentration in the atmosphere has increased. That would be my message to my colleagues, and I hope you can help communicate that to them. Some of you are staff members. I hope you will take that back to your offices. To the energy and policy people present, it's a slightly different message, which is we must remind ourselves of what this is all about. It is not about gigawatts of installed capacity or the number of square feet of photovoltaics or whatever installed. It is about finding sustainable ways to produce enough energy for the 9 billion people to use to get a satisfactory quality of life. So if we look at it that way, as recognizing that the way we do it now to produce and use energy is the greatest insult to our planet, and we think about how we will meet the needs of people, it forces us to look at the picture quite differently. It leads us to put social policy concerns and energy efficiency at as high a level as energy production. Because if we're trying to meet needs, it's not how much energy we generate, it is whether we are generating energy in a way that actually helps improve the lives of people. And if we're helping them use the energy in such a way. So you've always been able to count on Worldwatch to put environmental and economic affairs in perspective, geographically and temporally, to take a long-term view, a global view, the kind of view that is not usually in the congressional perspective. So I'm delighted to have Worldwatch bring their perspective to the Hill. We need it badly. I'm sorry I didn't get a larger room and draw in even more people for a very good program. Thanks. Thank you very much.
I'm going to talk about the future of renewable energy. 3 takeaway messages from this report first, before I go into the details. First of all, if you read the report, you can't help but understand that our current thinking about the future of renewable energy is really out of date. We're thinking about renewable energy as if it's still 1995. Our thinking is 10 or even 20 years behind the reality of where renewables are today, where markets and policies and investments are going in the future, where scenarios and experts are projecting things to happen in the next 10, 20 years. So we really need to understand that our thinking is behind the times. Second message is that we're facing an explosion of policies in the next 5 to 10 years. Policies which are not related to cost or price for renewable energy, but policies related to the integration of renewable energy into power grids, into transport, into buildings, into industry. And this explosion of policies is going to catch a lot of people by surprise, because we're going to see, large shares of renewables in many countries coming and policies that have to deal with this. And we've seen the whole history of policies for price support, for cost-based, incentives. But we really need to see a whole shift in this. And I think a lot of the experts interviewed for this report really pointed to that. And third message is that the future of renewable energy is really no longer a question of technology, and it's no longer a question of cost. It's really related to finance, business models, investments, standards and codes for new ways of integrating, new types of business models for utilities, a whole range of social issues and structures that have to come into play. And I think as I go through this, you may get a sense of this. As Christine and Mohammed have said, I was the original lead author for the Renewables Global Status Report in 2005, and I wrote it as the lead author for 6 years through 2010, and really got a very good grounding in where we stand. And again, where we stand is not at all where most people think we stand. Christine gave a very nice presentation in terms of the current situation with renewables, and I think one of the things you didn't mention, which I think is really surprising to most people, if I said that today annual investment in renewable energy is greater than annual investment in fossil fuel and nuclear power generation combined globally, that would probably surprise you. Most people would say, well, maybe by 2020 that would happen. But it's been true for the last 3 years running. Since 2010, annual investment in renewable power generation globally has exceeded annual investment in fossil fuels and nuclear power combined. And so renewables are no longer just becoming mainstream, they're actually the majority of the power sector investment. They're actually now the main focus of the power sector globally. And I think that's something which, as I say, our thinking is behind the times. We're thinking as if it were still in the 1990s. So a lot of the interesting statistics Christine pointed out from 2012. I just wanted to mention one thing in terms of what you said. That investment is down. The Bloomberg numbers show investment is down by 10% or something this year compared to for 2012 compared to 2011. But capacity installation did not decrease in 2012. We still saw 30 gigawatts of solar PV added in 2012, the same as 2011. We still saw 40 gigawatts of wind power added in 2012, the same as 2011. So capacity did not decline in terms of the annual increase. The investment went down because the cost of renewables went down so much. The cost of solar PV was so much lower in 2012 compared to 2011, and that's why we saw less investment, not because the sector is slacking off. So I think that's also a really interesting point. So to get back to the futures, after writing the Global Status Report for 6 years, I started to think, okay, let me write about the future of renewable energy. But I didn't want to just write about one point of view or my own thoughts or one perspective, one scenario. I wanted to capture the full range of global thinking about what the future of renewable energy looks like, just like the status report captures the full range of status information. So I went around the world and I personally interviewed 150 leading experts in renewable energy, industry executives. I talked with CEOs of major renewable energy companies. I talked with finance experts in London and New York. I talked with researchers and analysts. I talked with people in the industry. And I asked them, how do you see the future of renewable energy? What does that look like to you? And I ended up with 1,000 pages of handwritten interview notes from all of those interviews. This took me 2 years, by the way. You can read it in 2 hours, but the whole process took 2 years. We also then looked at all of the recently published scenarios from the last 3 years, about 5,000 pages of scenarios. What do they say about the future of renewables? What are their results? Put all that together into 40 pages. Okay. So what does it say? Some highlights. I'll give you 3 or 4 specific highlights. First of all, in terms of the shares of renewable energy in the long term, we see sort of 3 groupings of scenarios. We see scenarios which project low shares, or so-called conservative scenarios in the 15 to 20% range, and these tend to be by oil companies, by the International Energy Agency, the IEA, by departments of energy, including US DOE. And these are historically the levels we've seen. So Christine said we're about 18% share of global energy today, and these scenarios basically continue to project that level into the far future, even though energy is increasing, but the share of renewables does not increase. And there's a second grouping, moderate scenarios, which are in the 30 to 50% range. And we're seeing a lot more scenarios from credible organizations come into this range. For example, the International Energy Agency, their Energy Technology Perspectives, ETP, scenario, which is 2 degrees of global warming, shows 40% share of total global energy from renewables by 2050, and many others in that range too. And we're seeing many more scenarios in the high range, between 50 and 80% share of total global energy from renewables, and not just Greenpeace. You'd expect Greenpeace to be up in that range, but now we have many others. The IPCC special report on renewable energy from 2 years, 2 years ago, reviewed a whole range of scenarios, and they found many above 50% that were related to climate stabilization at around 450 parts per million by 2050. And this global energy assessment was a major scientific work that took 5 years, hundreds of experts, showing a 75%, a high range, 75% share of global energy. So the point here is that it's really no longer credible to project the low shares of 15 to 20%. Those levels are no longer tenable. They just can't be defended anymore in view of the fact that we see so many scenarios credibly projecting higher shares. We're really starting from the 30, 40% level. That's sort of almost the baseline now, what the future looks like. We're going to get there, almost no question, 30, 40%. The only question now is, are we going to get to the higher levels, 50 to 80% shares? And what is that going to take in terms of integrating large shares of renewables? And I think that point is hit home if you look at, these are projections and targets for share of electricity only. The previous one was for total energy, including transport and heating. This is for electricity only. And you can see for the European Union, the European Commission has projected 35% share of electricity. This is all by 2030. the IEA itself has projected 45% share of electricity in Europe, and EREC, an industry association which Christine Linz used to lead, has projected 65% share of electricity. And if you look at policy targets, Christine mentioned that there are 120 countries around the world now with some type of target for future shares or amounts of renewable energy, and many of those targets are in the 30, 40, 50% range and higher. Denmark is targeting 100% share of its electricity from renewable energy by 2030. And I spoke with the utility in Denmark. I interviewed them. And they said, it's not a question of if we're going to reach 100% anymore. We know we're going to reach 100%. It's just a question of how we do it. How long is it going to take us? We're rolling up our sleeves. We're figuring out. We're getting to work on it. We're going to do it. There's no question anymore it's going to happen there. Germany has a policy target for 80% share of electricity by 2050, and that's stepwise up from 35% in 2020 and 50% in 2030. And so the German government has said we can achieve an 80% share of electricity system by 2050. And so when I say that these low renewables or conservative scenarios are no longer credible, part of the evidence for that is that the German government says we can reach 80%. And many other governments are also saying we can reach high shares. So policy targets plus credible scenarios are really pointing to these higher levels. So that's on the sort of side of how much renewables. You can look at sort of installed capacities. You know, we've talked a lot about gigawatts today. You know, various projections. Greenpeace is projecting a 12-fold increase in wind power capacity by 2050. They're projecting a 25-fold increase in solar PV capacity globally by 2050. And you can see various ranges of projections. This is just for the U.S. actually, and the DOE projection that solar PV capacity will double from 4 to 8 gigawatts by 2030 is simply just doesn't hold up anymore. If you look at sectoral shares of future amounts of energy, so for example, the fact that heating shares or transport shares are separate from electricity shares, then you find that it's much more difficult to achieve high shares of heating capacity. It's going to take us much longer. There's a lot more work to be done in terms of building policy, in terms of integration into codes and standards and so on. And experts said basically, look, it's going to be the most difficult to get high shares of renewables in heating and cooling for buildings. And high shares of renewables for transport are going to be the most uncertain, because we still don't know in terms of transport technology. We still don't know in terms of electric vehicle technology how fast that's going to evolve, where that's going, and advanced biofuels technology for high shares of transport also. And I think underlining all of these projections and thoughts about the future of renewables is the fact that historic projections of renewables have really been underestimating where the renewables markets are going. This is an estimate by the International Energy Agency made in 2000, which projected 35 gigawatts of wind power by 2010. In fact, we reached 200 gigawatts, so 6 times more than the IEA projected back in 2000. The World Bank projected 6 gigawatts of wind power in China by 2020. And in fact, we reached 60 gigawatts in 2010. So they underprojected by a factor of 10 and 10 years too late. And that really highlights the enormous growth of the wind industry in China in just the last 5 or 6 years in particular, where China, as Christine has alluded to, has really become the global leader in wind power. Second theme or point I'll make today in terms of the report concerns investment. So when I spoke with finance experts, they basically said, we expect investment in renewable energy to double by either 2020 or 2025. So we're currently about $260 billion annually. Many experts projected $500 billion investment in renewables annually by 2020, 2025. The Greenpeace scenario actually shows $1 trillion of investment on an annual average basis over 20 years, over the next 20 years. And Bloomberg New Energy Finance projects $400 billion investment by 2020. And you can see they also have a target, a projection for 2030 of about $460 billion. So finance experts and scenarios are pointing to much higher levels of investment in the future. However, they also said, look, the existing sources of finance are not going to allow us to reach those high levels. So we're going to have to see new sources of finance coming. The existing sources of finance are primarily bank lending and utility balance sheet finance. but experts pointed to a whole range of new sources, particularly insurance and pension funds. And I was at the Bloomberg New Energy Finance Summit in New York 2 days this week, and a lot of people were talking about the unlocking of the insurance and pension fund source of finance. And in particular, that insurance companies, pension funds, would start to see renewable energy as the lowest risk energy technology. Certainly lower risk than coal in terms of uncertainty of future coal prices, but also the revenue of coal operators in Europe is under serious threat right now because in Germany today, solar PV is providing half of the total daytime power capacity on some days. So solar PV is actually half of total generation in the daytime in some days in Germany. And if you own a coal plant there, you're having to curtail your output to cycle it on a daily basis. Your revenue is way down on your fixed asset. Your business model is really under threat. You're in danger of going bankrupt even, many have said. And so owning a coal plant has now become a very risky proposition. And to the degree to which sources of finance will see renewables as the lowest risk, as an inflation hedge in the future, once you've built the plant, that's it. Your energy costs are locked in. You're basically hedging future energy costs for the next 20, 25, 30 years. Renewable energy would start to be seen as a hedging instrument, as a way to balance portfolios and reduce total energy portfolio risk. A lot of other sources also mentioned community funds, sovereign wealth funds, all sorts of things like that. And these investments would flow through a variety of new kinds of business models. Micro-utilities, third-party utilities, a whole variety of new types of mobility services, community and cooperative ownership models, all these sorts of things are mentioned briefly in the report. So that's on the finance side. Now, one of the really interesting things to me about doing this work, when I interviewed people, was I thought, okay, we're going to see a big role for wind power manufacturers and solar PV manufacturers in the future, but I didn't expect to find such a huge role for existing companies in the future of renewable energy. The future of renewable energy really does not belong to wind power manufacturers, it belongs to the IT industry. It belongs to automakers, it belongs to utilities. And the roles of these different companies, utility companies, not just in purveyors of a commodity, kilowatt hours of electricity, but rather as managers of very complicated power systems with microgrids, storage at centralized distributed levels, complicated, multi-level power systems that they have to manage and balance. And so the changing role of utilities in doing that basically points to a whole range of options for balancing large shares of renewables. And I think we're going to see utilities really start to embrace these options. You see this already in Denmark, in Germany, even in parts of the US, for example, California. There are many options for balancing large shares of renewable energy on power grids, not just energy storage. And again, many people think we need energy storage for renewables, but in fact, all of these options for balancing large shares of renewables, integrating large shares of renewables, are already being practiced today by utilities around the world. It's already being done. And so if you look at a lot of the scenarios, you find large roles for utility companies in these sort of balancing markets, not just purveyors of energy storage. For example, demand response, the utility is able to control the load to match the supply, which is the opposite of the way utilities have worked. So the scenarios and the interviews really point to a large role for electric power utilities. Auto companies. If you look at the role of auto companies in terms of integration of renewable energy into transport, you see large roles for auto companies in terms of electric vehicles, in terms of integration into two-wheel, three-wheel vehicles, light vehicles, much lighter vehicles that allow for much better battery performance and so on. When I first moved to China, I lived in China for 3 years. 2005 to 2008. When I first moved there, most of the two-wheelers, the motorcycles, motor scooters, motorbikes on the road were internal combustion, gasoline. When I left in 2008, already most of the two-wheelers on the streets of Beijing had become electric. Already this transformation was taking place in China, it's happening in India. You see basically every auto company in the world producing now or planning to produce an electric vehicle. There's already about 6 or 7 or 8 commercial models available. And so, the large role for auto companies in integrating renewable electricity with electric vehicles in the so-called vehicle-to-grid concept, where you have cars that can interact with the grid, that you can store power during the nighttime in your car and sell it to the utility at $2 per kilowatt during the day, basically making profit off of the difference in energy costs and so on, and the role of auto companies in doing that. Also, the role of oil companies. And I mentioned oil companies as a source of finance for renewable energy. Oil companies are really investing very little amounts right now, a few billion here and there from one company or another, but much less than they could be, much less than the total levels of finance we're seeing globally from renewables. But oil companies, not just as purveyors of finance or even as producers of advanced biofuels, which they want to do, but oil companies as developers of offshore wind power. Many experts said, look, the cost of offshore wind power, only 1/3 of the cost is the turbine itself. Most of the cost is the logistics cost, operation, maintenance, construction, offshore logistics. Oil companies are great at that. That's their expertise. If they really got into the offshore wind power business, they could greatly reduce the cost of offshore wind, which is still quite a bit higher than onshore wind. And so this would be a huge role for oil companies in developing offshore wind capacity. So far, they're not interested. They don't seem to be getting into it, maybe on the edges or on the margins, but this could be a big role for them. In terms of other companies, building material manufacturers, a large role for building material manufacturers. If we look at the integration of renewable energy into the built environment, into buildings, you see many options for using renewable heating and cooling. Solar thermal, geothermal heat pumps, biomass in terms of pellets and stoves and so on. The prerequisite for this is much more efficient building construction, low energy or so-called zero energy buildings. And once you have that, it doesn't require much heating energy. And so the point is that this is still very expensive, but it doesn't have to be. Experts said, look, this can cost almost the same as conventional construction. High efficiency, low energy buildings coupled with renewable heating and cooling technology. Doesn't have to cost more, but today it costs a lot more because it's one of a kind, custom, one-off. Everything is manufactured, designed individually. And the role of building material manufacturers and integrating renewable energy into existing building materials, building components is huge. We start to see like solar glass in an architectural catalog, so that people can order it, architects can order it, for large commercial buildings, solar glass rather than standard architectural glass. It doesn't have to cost more, it just means that they have to understand how to apply it, how to design buildings based on it. And so a huge role for building materials companies to integrate renewable energy into their existing product lines. And then finally, the role of IT companies. And this is what really surprised me, is you see IT throughout all of these visions of integrating renewables into power grids, into balancing large shares of renewables, integrating renewables into buildings in terms of building management systems, integrating renewables into transport in terms of vehicle charging, smart charging, programmable charging in terms of when you can use your car and battery and so on to interact with the grid. And experts have suggested that Google will have a closer relationship with car owners and homes like this than than the utility companies or the car makers themselves. That people will interact with their energy systems using their phone through IT providers, and huge amounts of IT will go into this. The wind industry is now one of the largest users of supercomputer power in the world, not just for design, but for wind farm siting, for operation and maintenance. Wind farms have hundreds of monitoring points on them. They can tell now when the parts are going to fail before they do. Huge role for IT in the future of all of these types of visions and technologies I've talked about. So my final point is related to cost. And this is something which I think also surprises people, and again, our thinking is behind the times, our thinking is out of date. The cost of solar PV has fallen by a factor of 3 in the last 3 or 4 years. The cost of solar PV panels is now $1, less than $1 per watt. Now $1 per watt, for those of you who may remember, I've been in this business for 25 years. I've been working in renewable energy since the 1980s. And I remember back then, people said $1 per watt for solar PV is the holy grail. Once we reach that level, the game's over, we're going to see solar PV everywhere. Well, $1 per watt today is actually 50 cents per watt in 1980s dollars, and so we're actually well beyond the $1 per watt level that people projected back then. And so the cost of the panel itself is no longer the issue. I mean, there's all this heat about dumping and subsidies from Chinese PV manufacturers and so on. The cost of the panels is not the issue anymore. It's the cost of the installation labor, it's the cost of the framing, it's the cost of the wiring in the house, the cost of the balance of system, the inverters, and so on. And there are many ways to reduce those costs, but they don't relate to solar PV manufacturing. They relate to building codes and standards. They relate to the way you build homes, let's say pre-wired for solar PV. They relate to building integrated materials, again, the role of building materials companies. And we're seeing the so-called grid parity of solar PV, where the cost of solar PV without subsidy is equal to retail electricity price. This is so-called grid parity. We're seeing grid parity in more and more places around the world. You can point to Spain, you can point to Hawaii, other parts of the US. This spreading wave of grid parity that without any subsidy, solar PV is competitive with retail electricity prices. And experts saw this spreading around the world in the next 5 to 10 years. And I think that's a really important consideration. We're not thinking about the way in which solar PV is like exploding onto the scene and actually wrecking the business models of existing utilities. The Spanish utilities are resisting the policy in Spain to allow interconnection of PV without any subsidy, so-called net metering policy, because they know as soon as they allow that, everybody's going to put solar PV on the roof in Spain, and basically the utilities are going to lose market share to their own customers. Without any subsidies, the Spanish feed-in tariff policy expired years ago, the market collapsed, but not because of the inherent economics of the technology, because of the policy environment. So I won't go into details. You can read the report in terms of technology evolution of wind power, of solar CSP, we've heard, concentrating solar thermal power, geothermal, biomass in terms of use of pellets for combined heat and power, advanced biofuels, this is cellulose, agricultural waste, and many are projecting the lower cost for agricultural waste, for cellulose, for ethanol from cellulose in the future. And I'll just leave us with this final slide, which you can read in the report. Throughout the report, there's a series of these so-called great debates. So each one is a small box, and basically these great debates came up in the interviews. These are things that people, raise questions about. How are we thinking about these things, particularly the cost comparison issue? How are we comparing costs? I'll just leave these here for us to think about a little bit. I know our time is up. We might have a few minutes for questions and discussion, but thank you very much. And read the report.
Thank you very much, Eric. I think this is amazing work. It really adds nicely to the global status report. I'm not sure, you haven't told us, is it going to be an annual publication from now on?
Not next year, no.
Every year you're going to look into the future again? It leaves me quite puzzled. And we're discussing this at Worldwatch really on a daily basis. On the one hand, you have all these amazing trends. We heard from Mohammed, last 6 years, renewable energy quadrupled. The solar industry now employs 35% more people than coal and mining together. So this is all amazing, but is it enough? I think that's the other side of the equation. We heard from Congressman Holt that we're already beyond 400 ppm, which is a very unhealthy and very scary scenario already. That's the presence of climate change. So it leaves us somewhere in between. We're having all these hopeful trends, and on the other hand, some of us feel we're still driving head on into a wall. So we're not going to solve all this big question, I think, that we're all dealing with on a daily basis now, but we do have time for a few questions. Before you all leave, I want to also thank the team for organizing this, Evan Mussolino and Grant Potter, and Supriya Kumar and everybody else from Worldwatch's Climate and Energy team. Thank you very much, guys, and thank you for coming.